All right. Welcome to the Faith in the Valley Justice interview series. My name is Bryson White. I'm the Faith Regional Coordinator for Faith in the Valley, native of Fresno, California. It's a pleasure to be with you all again. If you have been following our journey, we have been having conversations with clergy, lay leaders, organizers, and academics about the role of faith in organizing here in the Central Valley and helping think through with an analysis of the Central Valley what it takes to change the conditions that we're living in, the various conditions and intersecting oppressions that face the Central Valley, while also thinking about the resilience of the peoples who live in California Central Valley. And so it was good to be with you all again. Today, we're with a few of my colleagues from Faith in the Valley, and I'm going to call on them to just to introduce themselves, name, organization, which is obviously Faith in the Valley, and their position with the organization and which county they represent. And then we're going to get started with a few questions that are hopefully the questions are insightful to provoke good conversation for the listener. We'll start in my bottom left-hand corner with Letty.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Leti Valencia, and I'm the co-director of organizing for Faith in the Valley. And I am based out of Stanislaus County, but while we're working from home from my hometown in Winton in Merced County.
Dalton.
Hi, I'm Dalton Jones with Faith in the Valley in Kern County, and I'm an organizer.
All right.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Brianna Rojas, and I am a community organizer with Faith in the Valley in San Joaquin County.
Right.
And good morning, y'all. Andy Levine, Deputy Director of Faith in the Valley, born and raised in Fresno and based in Fresno.
All right. So let's get started, you all. We have about 6 questions, and we're going to do our best to get through the most important ones first. So the first question, telling people in your city to vote, but we have candidates who refuse to say Black Lives Matter, which is the bare minimum for an elected official. How do young people with different values than the majority of our elected officials in the Central Valley still participate in our electoral politics? Letty, can you start us off?
Absolutely. So I think this is really an important question, and one that I've been wrestling with, particularly this year, given everything going on in the world. I've been with Faith in the Valley now for 4 years. And really my journey in civic participation really began when I actually started working. Prior to that, I was engaged at a really minimal level because it wasn't something that I had been exposed to growing up. And I feel like in the last few years, a lot of it, because of this administration, has really began to awaken young people to be more civically engaged. This year in particular, after the murder of George Floyd, which of course we've seen several times, unfortunately, over the last few years because of the video recordings. But this year, the protests that came about were really led by young people, and young people, in my opinion, that have not necessarily been engaged historically. And for Faith in the Valley, for us as organizers in the Central Valley, I think we're in a really different context because of our local politics. And part of our role is really engaging people in the community, particularly those most impacted by the policies and laws that are passed by our cities, our counties, and our state, and getting folks to go out to vote. So it felt for me really tone deaf to tell young folks to then get engaged, to go out to vote, to register for the census, when we have elected officials and entire governments really that don't reflect values of the families in the Central Valley. They definitely don't. A lot of them aren't reflective of the values that I hold as a young person that's grown up in the Central Valley. And so I think it's something that we've got to continue to wrestle with, but I think in places where there's been a lot of work, a lot of organizing with those most vulnerable, we are starting to see things change. And so that's really what I'm holding on to, is that the more we can engage young people, even though right now our elected officials really have been doing the bare minimum, the more we get engaged, the more we're able to hold them accountable, the more we're able to share our own stories and create deeper understanding around what families actually go through in the Central Valley.
Yeah, thank you so much for that insightful response, Letty. Yeah, Brianna, could you continue with this, please?
Yeah, I think usually what comes to mind is like the first thing that I think about is honoring like where they're at and how they feel. Because just maybe a couple years ago, I was in a place where I didn't care. And it really felt like even my one decision or my one vote, like would not make an impact, you know. So I always try to first like honor like how they're feeling. But I think similarly, like in hearing a lot of like voices of young folks that I've heard, it's like it doesn't matter, like there's still like a loss of hope, or you know, they try to have hope but then the people around them really aren't wanting to be engaged, you know. So I'm always thinking of how can I encourage, number one, that like regardless someone's going to be elected, you know. And so yeah, I think for me, in going back even to what Letty's saying, it's like the more that we get engaged and we hold elected officials accountable and share our stories, because I think the biggest thing that I've realized is that I have felt alone in my own story. And I think that if they can make us feel like it's just we're by ourselves, we're the only ones going through this, then it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, a lot of us have similar stories and want to make a change in our community. So hopefully I didn't go on a tangent, but yeah.
You're muted, Bryson.
That's an important point, that the power brokers in each of our cities want to isolate us from one another, but especially they want to isolate young people from coalescing their voice into one, or at least multiple voices that is moving in the same direction, to make people feel isolated, which makes us feel less powerful, right? Yes, that's an excellent point that you raise and lift up. Are there any other additional comments that anybody would like to lift up regarding this question before we move on to the second question?
Yeah, I would just say, I think like even in the, you asked the question, Reverend Bryson, around like why electoral politics. I think it's revealing, like even like when I first heard it, when I heard you ask that, like electoral politics, I think our heads go straight to candidates, whether they're whatever, party affiliation or office they're running for, that's like the image we have of voting. And I think what I really am inspired by in the work that we do and the moment that we're in, even in California specifically, with the ballot initiatives that are up for a vote before November 3rd, is voting is not about, is actually mostly, even I would say, not about candidates. In California, at least, we have this power of local but state ballot initiatives. And what's beautiful about it actually is like essentially ballot initiatives. So like this year, we're really pushing hard for like Prop 15 that would bring literally, $12 billion back into our communities and our schools that we should have had all along, but now have the chance to really infuse into our communities that need them now more than ever, and to vote no on Prop 20, so that we don't roll back our criminal justice reforms and actually just re-incarcerate folks that actually need some love and support and not incarceration. Those are just two examples of, we have the power on the ballot and as voters to actually, like, I would describe ballot initiatives as we go around the elected officials. It doesn't matter if they support them or not. We have the right to, we literally with Prop 15, we organized with petition signatures to get it on the ballot. And now we have the opportunity to pass it, to bring the money into our schools and communities. And our elected officials, I mean, the ones that can't say Black Lives Matter, the bare minimum, to your point, both of these issues I think are connected to Black Lives Matter. And for those elected officials that can't say it, if Prop 15 passes and Prop 47, 57 stay in place, if Prop 20 gets defeated, then whether they like it or not, that's the law of the land that they have to actually follow and implement. And so we actually have, in that case, more power than they do. And that's what's on the ballot on November 3rd. And then I think just the second thing I would say connected to it is like with the framing of elected officials that can't even say Black Lives Matter, the bare minimum. I don't think it's an accident that in Fresno specifically, where I live, a few years ago, I think if you had looked at the city council as a whole, hardly any of the council members could have said that or would have said that publicly, to the point now that I think it's not coincidental because of like the increase in voting and activism and the uprising after George Floyd's murder. It's actually pretty telling that even though it's still only symbolic, it's not actually in policy and action yet. It actually unanimously at city council, all 7 council members essentially approved painting Black Lives Matter in front of City Hall. Again, that still is the bare minimum because that's not actually into policy or practice. Now that's the next step and challenge for us as people getting engaged. But I don't think it's a coincidence that at least at a symbolic level, we've actually come pretty far in a few years to the point of whether they actually really truly believe it or not, they're at least forced to publicly at least sign their name next to painting Black Lives Matter in front of City Hall.
Yeah, excellent points, Andy. Thanks for lifting that up. That's a good and interesting point around how we can't reduce participation in electoral politics to our engagement with voting for X candidate or Y candidate, but there's different sort of mechanisms in place for our participation in that field to manifest. And I think that's an important point because, if people aren't fired up about a particular candidate in California, you can still participate in electoral politics, even if you don't want to vote for your local mayor or district attorney, although you should, in my estimation. If you don't, you can still participate in electoral politics if you feel like your options are real limited. Yeah, I appreciate that.
You can literally, to your point, I think we wouldn't recommend this, but you can literally skip all those questions on the ballot and only vote for the ones, only the ballot initiatives you care about or don't care about. It's not like it's, mandatory to fill out the entire ballot. Again, we would encourage that, but that's your choice too. That's your power as a voter.
Yeah. Right. I think just to stay on this conversation and just in my continuous journey and reflecting and evaluating the different work that I've participated in the last few years, civic engagement, voter engagement, electoral politics definitely isn't just about voting. It's not just about voting for a candidate, and it's also not just about voting for a proposition. It's also not just about passing a policy. Those things are pieces of the puzzle, and there has to be continuous engagement. There has to be continuous participation all year around, right? Like we've seen Prop 47, Prop 57, the rental housing improvement, rental housing inspection policy in Fresno that needed to have a budget attached to it. We need to continue to follow how these policies are moving, making sure that they're being implemented, right? Because passing Proposition 15, for example, which, we're going to pass it, we're staying hopeful. For the Central Valley, it doesn't mean that money is going to go where it needs to go, right? Like it doesn't mean that's going to go into the Black and Brown communities that have been disinvested in, right? Like it's not going to probably come to Winton. That's not where the Merced Board of Supervisors is going to put it first. So that's, I think, a responsibility that I hold as an organizer and also as a young person in the Central Valley. And that's the type of engagement and organizing that I'm wanting to do with people, definitely like me, like my family, like my neighbors, and having them engaged. I think what we saw this year in folks coming out and protesting, the mass protests, the defunding the police, the folks that made it so far, like Kern County, where we had the people's budget and, they attended the hearings, etc. And I'll hand it over to Dalton to talk a little bit about what's going on now. But as soon as we turned our backs on what was happening, as soon as we stopped paying attention, they're because of the amount of power that was built, and it was power that was built and power that was challenged in ways it had never been challenged before. And now we're seeing the system not just elected officials, but entire systems react and punish. And I'll hand it over to Dalton to just talk a little bit more about what's going on. But I think it's an excellent example of why we can't afford to just show up on the street, or just show up to vote, or just show up to a city council hearing. It has to be continuous and active.
Yeah. Yeah, Bakersfield City, not big. We have Bakersfield City Council, Kern County Board of Supervisors. Yeah. They decided that they wanted to punish thousands of people and not give them over $1 million contract to do COVID outreach because the BHC's because the People's Budget BACO is a part of the BHC, and we were trying to defund the Bakersfield Police Department. They were like, that's political, and we don't want to do anything political, and we don't want to work with political organizations. And it was a very interesting, rich stance, especially because they said nothing when Robert Forbes was murdered by a white man, a white supremacist in this county. They said nothing. We have white men literally harassing people every single day here because they're Trump supporters, and they say nothing. So I think it was very, very rich that they decided to choose that this is the line that they decided to draw, and that this was a little too far. But to let these point, and then to the question, I think the thing for me specifically, and the folks that I've been able to talk with the most, realizing that I run you, you don't run me, I think was really important. Yeah, you're the elected official, but at the end of the day, I run you, I'm your boss. I'm allowed to say whatever I would like to say to you, and you're going to do what I need you to do because that's why you're there. So I just think, yeah, this younger generation is just they're really trained to go, really TTG, really, really just ready. And I think that's what the whole thing is about.
Yeah, thank you to both of you for those really insightful comments, and the need to continuously organize and not to reduce our political activity to one single area. But we're facing our oppressions are so multifaceted that it's going to take a multifaceted approach and a continuous organizing to undo what elected officials in the Central Valley have done for the past 40, 50 odd years. Yeah, so thank you to both of you for those insightful conversations. And Dalton, thanks for highlighting what's taking place in Kern. I mean, because that's just absolutely ridiculous that the city would punish organizations that are serving impoverished communities to reduce a pandemic, right? And punish them predicated upon their critique of the police department. And like you said, that's just an insightful piece into what the people in Bakersfield are facing and have faced at the hands of their local governing officials. It's an atrocious thing. Let's move to question number 2 and keep this train rolling. It kind of stems from question number 1. For many young people from Black, Brown, and Southeast Asian communities in the Central Valley, voting may not be a formative part of our upbringing. So how do we create a political culture where young people find electoral participation useful in reshaping their cities? Letty, can you start us off?
Absolutely. So I think this is a really important question, and one that for me is really personal. I grew up in the Central Valley. I grew up in Winton and Merced County, born and raised here. And I voted when I was 18 because, I turned 18 and so I could vote, and it was the cool thing to do. And after that, I didn't vote again until I actually started working in an organization that taught me the importance of going out to vote. I hadn't been to a city. It wasn't something that was, though my dad was a US citizen, and he had the ability to vote. I literally did not know that there was elections on non-presidential years. I had no idea that there was elections on non-presidential years. That you were supposed to vote in the primary, and that there was a primary and a general election, I also had no idea. And I was a 4.0 student. I was an AP government. I was laughing with Brianna. Like, it wasn't like I wasn't, engaged, or I wasn't paying attention. It just wasn't relevant, and it wasn't a part of, now my family, we vote together because of me. Everybody's like, let's do it together. Who are we voting for? What are we voting for? What does this mean? My friends, the people around me. And it's created now a culture of, because I'm now engaged, everybody around me is engaged. And so I think that's the formative piece, that as folks that are actually relatable, from the Central Valley, like, we're the ones that are going to be able to get young people, like Bree and Dalton. They're the ones that are going to be able to get the people around them, whether it's friends, family, neighbors, etc. Because it's really, the watching it on the news is not enough. It's like understanding why it matters, and feeling like, there's something that's going to happen out of this action that I take, that's long term. I'd love for Bree to answer next, if that's okay.
Yeah, our rotation isn't fixed, so yeah.
Yeah, I think when I think about this question, it really, so for me, I feel like I didn't become engaged in like voting, or even I thought like it was just presidential. I didn't realize it's like your city council members, your mayors, your county board of supervisors, like board of trustees for education. Like, there's all these different, areas. And so I was just telling my mom, I'm like, Mom, I never, we never talked about this. And then she reminded me, I was always at the voting polls every time on election day. And I was like, oh, wow, you were. But I don't know where I learned it, but I just remember when we would vote, or when I would hear family vote, we always voted based on the candidate's name. Did it sound Latino enough, Mexican enough? And it was just like, now that I'm where I'm at, I'm like, yo, that was like the wrong way to do things. But we just didn't know, And so definitely, I think for me, my journey, I'm still on the journey, but it didn't transform really till I went to sociology. So I graduated from UOP here in Stockton, and really that's where my like mind had shifted. But to that question, how do we create a political culture where young people find it like exciting and also wanting to bring change in their community? I think it starts at schools. I think also there, like, you know, creating an environment that makes it even relatable to their own experiences. Well, when I went and did a presentation at my old prior high school, one thing, in sociology, you learn so much about like social issues and inequalities and all of these things. But one question I proposed to the high school students was like, do you ever wonder why there may be sidewalks in a high school out north, but here we have no sidewalks? So just even like sparking some kind of question in order to get their like mind engaged and thinking like, why do certain things happen the way that they do? So trying to like spark that, but definitely I feel like if schools can partner with organizations, would be pretty cool. And recently my husband did a survey because he's a government economics teacher, and one of his questions was like, would you be interested in joining an organization that focuses on social issues? And over 70% of them said yeah. So I know that there's that desire for them to want to participate, but I think how do we find it in a way that's also exciting for them and relatable?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, that's an overwhelming majority of young people that want to participate. So that's showing that young people are tracking the situation our society is in, and understand the conditions that they're living within, and that they have a vision and a desire to create that change. It's just a matter of us helping facilitate them into spaces where they can actually step in to their own power and be the change agents that they have the potential to be. So yeah, thanks for lifting that up. And that's a really cool survey that your husband did. It is he's a high school teacher.
Yeah, so he teaches juniors and seniors, but yeah, government econ.
Yeah, cool. Dalton, you want to jump in?
Yeah, totally. I resonate hella with what Brianna just said, especially like the like not knowing who anybody was, but only voting for like the ethnic names. Like I still do that. I'm a terrible person. I don't care. But yeah, especially with like what you just said in terms of just like mad young people want to do something, but they don't know how to. That was me. That was like hella me, like maybe like 4-ish years ago. Like I read a paragraph on what community organizing was. And I was like, oh, this sounds lit. I want to do it. Had no idea what it was. Had no idea how to do it. And like Faith in the Valley organizers were my not patients. They were like my regulars at a coffee shop that I worked at. And all I did was late to work one day and I saw them protesting. I was like, oh, bet, like they're protesting. This sounds rowdy and fun. I wanna get into this. And through that, that's how I learned like, oh, so like there's multiple elections in a year. Oh, this is how this works. I had no idea this is how this system works. So I think just like making organizing, making anything having to do with like the world of social justice available to people, which means like one, bringing in people that don't look like the same exact version of the people we presently have, because that's just going to make it less approachable. That's just going to make it seem like, okay, cool, I can only be a college educated person if I want to do any of this stuff, or I can only be a white man, or I can only be a straight person, or I can only blah, 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 blah. Like bring the people in, like make it available. Maybe that looks like meeting them where they're at. So if it's just like your homies are at a kickback and you're the person that like, you're the person that knows stuff, what if you guys are at the kickback and you like bring the quote unquote like education materials to the kickback and y'all just chill? Yeah, it might be a little boring for a little bit, but like, bro, I'm letting you know this right now. You and the homies are gonna be impacted by Prop 20 if it doesn't pass. Just bring it to them, make it fun.
Yeah, that's real. Like remove the sort of stuffiness outside of electoral politics, or just the participation and civic engagement. Remove that and just bring it to a more real level. And in that way, you can think with folks who are already thinking about these issues and on ramp them into work when they see that requirements or barriers for them to step into these forms of engagements. Yeah, that's a real cool response. Andy, you wanna contribute to this piece too?
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. A lot of really good points already. I would just say, like, from my positioning as a white person on this question specifically, I think recognizing as white people, like recognizing for myself that when I say voting is like the difference is gonna like, is the answer, or like when there's like that attempt to make that kind of like argument, just the recognition that it's easy for me to say that because the system has by and large has almost always worked for me, has been designed to set up for people who look like me, and actually to not work, in fact, actually do violence and harm to people who don't look like me, for Black and brown communities specifically. And so, when we talk about like the whether there may be resistance and skepticism in Black and brown communities specifically, to voting as like, what is that going to do? Like, it's, for me, it's actually like just actually treating people with like with the respect and dignity that they deserve, of not actually trying to sell this argument that voting is going to make the difference in and of itself. I do believe voting is a step forward. And I also do believe that if voting wasn't a step forward and didn't matter, that nationally and even locally, folks that actually do not share our interests and values wouldn't be doing everything they possibly can to try to actually take away that right to vote and to suppress that vote. And so that in itself is a sign that voting is a step. But I think one of the most harmful things that we can do, especially just again specifically as white people, is to actually sell a false bill of goods and say that voting in and of itself is going to make all the difference. Because I think it's real and right that there's skepticism when people say I've voted before, I've heard of people voting, and nothing has changed. My vote doesn't matter. And so really actually just like treating each other with respect and saying, yes, voting is a step forward. And like I said earlier, like the propositions, we can literally go around elected officials and pass things right now if we actually come together in mass, and that will be a step forward. And just being honest that that's not the end of it, that's not going to in and of itself change things. So we have to keep working together on things that actually are going to keep moving towards that. So like Letty's point, even around like, even with Prop 15, it's treating each other, like respecting each other enough to just be honest and say Prop 15 absolutely is a step forward. It's something we have to support because it's going to bring revenues into our schools and communities, but not actually trying to like paint this rosy picture as though like that's just going to like naturally go into all the right places. Like actually like respecting each other enough to say, to be honest and say Prop 15 will bring resources in, and because of who we have in office currently and the current political climate, we can't take our foot off the gas at that point and just assume they're going to do the right thing with that money. We have to keep working and making sure that they actually invest those resources in things that are going to be helpful and not harmful. And I think like just actually having that like respect to be honest, again, for me as a white person specifically, is a key towards that step forward of like, how is voting a step, but not the solution?
Yeah, thank you for that response. It actually rolls into the next question that I wanted to lift up. I mean, but before I ask that question, I'll make a brief comment to your comment, Andy. I think that's an important piece to highlight because we explored this in the previous Faith in the Valley Justice interview series with Dr. Ringer, that there is a tradition, particularly in Black politics, around not voting and withholding your vote as a way of leveraging power, and how that is a part of a political culture. But it also seems like in the climate that we're in, that there's so many foreign interests now delving in and shaping American politics and targeting voters to try to convince them that electoral politics does not matter at all. Right. And, and studies are showing, Russia's doing this, China's doing this, and targeting folks and trying to peel votes off to support one candidate over another. Right. And so it's important for us to sort of be honest about electoral politics in a way that doesn't make people feel as if like if they do vote and then their needs aren't met, that they don't necessarily just leave the arena of electoral politics, but we think about how do we reorganize and re-engage that space to transform that space also. So it's kind of just my own 2 cents on that, but thank you for highlighting that. But I want to transition to the next question, which is still in line with this discussion, which is another question around electoral politics. What is a key lesson that you have learned about limits of electoral politics and creating equitable cities? So this is about the limits of electoral politics. Letty, can we start with you?
Yeah, I think in some ways this is really similar to the conversation that we've been having around like all of the different facets of the work that we have to organize around electoral politics. I think specifically in the Central Valley, in our counties, it's not enough because we have a long, we've got entire administrations, entire governing offices that really don't see the full humanity of the people that are in their community, that don't see the full humanity of the farm workers, that don't see the full humanity of the people in prisons, that don't see the full humanity of the people that live on the wrong side of town or in the whole town. When I came back from college, my sister-in-law literally said, hey, when you're applying to jobs, you probably should put our address because they live in a nicer part of town, instead of saying that you're from Winton, that you're using your home address, because most people think that nothing good can come from there. And so that's, and that's, I think that's the story that is across the Central Valley, right? If you're applying for county position, I mean, we see this nationally, what your name is, where you live, etc. But it's it's again back to the active participation, the being involved, and really beginning to create tables that look really differently, and to bring the values and the agendas that our families hold, that our neighborhoods hold, and bringing them to tables that they've never one been invited in or allowed in. So I think that's definitely been a lesson, that it's not enough to vote, that it's not enough to pass a policy, that it's not enough to move one thing. It has to be active and long term.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, thanks for highlighting that. We're running a little low on time, so I'm just going to do less commenting and just move so we can get as many people thinking about this as possible. Dalton, can you hop in?
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I don't want to be, I feel like, no, never mind. Letty just said it. Electoral politics really don't mean that much to me, to be honest with you. I think that it's, what it does is it like, it gives us an opportunity to say like, yes, I've been doing this work all year long on whatever, but I stamped it. Yes, affirmment. Hopefully the elected officials, when this passes, do what they need to do. But it just kind of, I guess, like, I don't know if the word is validates or whatever, like the work we're already doing, because it's like, yes, it's gonna pass, but with Prop 15 and all this other stuff, we still have to do the work to make sure it works properly. So it's like, yeah, the limit of electoral politics is humans being humans. Humans are gonna human, which means the other humans gotta make sure the bill works the way it was written. Yeah, humans are the problem.
Yeah, that's another conversation on the theology of the fall. That's a theological anthropology conversation. Dalton will do that another time. Brianna, what would you like to say about the question?
I'm sorry, Bryson, can you repeat the question?
Okay, yeah, I'll repeat it, and then I'll let Andy go, and then you can hop in. Is that okay?
Cool. Cool.
The question is, what is a key lesson that you have learned about the limits of electoral politics and creating equitable cities?
Want me to go, Bryson?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like back to your first question, even connected to the question about like, what do we say about voting and getting involved in the process when we have elected officials who can't even say the bare minimum of Black Lives Matter. Like I said, in Fresno, fortunately, I think it's a good thing overall. Symbolically, we've gotten to a point where literally, again, the unanimously the Fresno City Council, they voted in support of painting Black Lives Matter in front of City Hall, something that, again, it's only symbolic. It makes no actual tangible difference at this point. But it is something symbolically that like 3 years ago, there's no way that actually, I think, could have been realistic. It would have been, it just would have been, I think, a whole conversation that would have gone nowhere. And that's in part because of the work that we and others have been doing to really build community power and to make sure that the real voices of people that are most often marginalized and dismissed are actually being at the center. But the reason why that's not enough is, again, just using Fresno as an example, they unanimously voted to paint that, and now 2 months later, they're on the verge of not only in this moment of reimagining public safety and actually reinvesting dollars in true public safety away from law enforcement and policing. In Fresno, in the backdrop of having Black Lives Matter painted in front of City Hall, they're next week about to vote to increase the $200 million Fresno PD budget by $10 million. And so like that for me is just an example of like, we can't just get caught up and fall for, honestly, symbolic gestures and just sort of saying the right thing. We have to be super clear, united and super clear on like what the concrete vision and change looks like, so that we don't accept or set or fall for anything less than that.
Yeah. Brianna?
Yeah, I think everyone pretty much said, a lot of what I was thinking about. But yeah, I think the limit is just making sure that we're continuously working at it. And it's not, like we've already said, voting. It's not just, but it's a continuous process of holding them accountable. Where's the funds going? County Board of Supervisor budget, where's those funds going? The CARES Act funding, where did that go? Did that go to home and mortgage relief? You know, just things like that. So it's a continuous process, and sometimes I guess that's where the limit can be, or it feels.
Yep. I mean, even taking Prop 15, for example, when that windfall money comes, where some is going to be earmarked for education, but other for local governments, we're going to have to be sure to organize so that, you know, the culture of really, you know, the worship of law enforcement in the Central Valley, that it doesn't sort of just capture those funds to increase police budgets, jailing budgets, et cetera. And so we have to organize and power in a way to think critically about, well, how are we redirecting these dollars, not just to the education allotment, but how are we actually making sure that money doesn't go to our incarceration, but into other aspects of our human flourishing, mental health programs, et cetera. So, you know, all organizing is reorganizing. And so I think you all lifted up and highlighted some really important points about the limits of electoral politics, that we don't sell people a bill of goods, that electoral politics themselves itself is the solution, but it's just one side of leveraging our power in the community amongst a multitude of different actions that can be taken. So, oh, that's my guy. He just came into the room. You want to say hi to the people, Kairos? Yeah, so that's our time. I know we have a hard stop at 9 o'clock. So thank you all for participating in this conversation. We know that you know, we didn't we didn't solve the problems of the Central Valley through this conversation, but hopefully for the listeners who choose to tune in, that they can that they'll find some key points to take and to think critically about as they engage in November's election and the ongoing organizing efforts that Faith in the Valley is leading in the Central Valley for us to create change in the region that we love. So so thank you all, and Carol says goodbye. And so yeah, so we'll talk later. And for those who are interested in watching this, we're going to post this on the Faith in the Valley webpage, and also it will be housed on the Faith in the Valley Facebook page for your educational purposes. So thank you. Peace and love, everybody.